Let's get the controversial part out of the way right now. Full face masks are just better. Now, I know you're already asking, A, no they aren't, and B, then why doesn't everybody use them? And we're going to address both of those points. But let's start by talking about why a full face mask really is better in almost all situations than the traditional regulator in your mouth and separate scuba mask. Fundamentally, it's only two characteristics that actually lead to all of the different various benefits and also the handful of downsides to a full face mask. Number one is that a full face mask is basically an octopus strapped to your face. It covers your whole face and it's strapped to your face. Number two is that a full face mask is pressurized. Now, that's something that I think a lot of people might not recognize, or you kind of know it subconsciously, but you don't think about it and you don't think about its implications. So let's talk about that first. This is specifically an OTS Guardian, but the concept is the same across all of the major full face masks, and my regulator is not here at the moment. It snaps in right there. But when you're wearing this, the whole inside of the mask is pressurized. When air comes in from your regulator, it's going to come in this hole right here, and it's going to spread throughout this whole area. So one of the major benefits, one of the really practical benefits of the full face mask is they don't fog. And that doesn't mean that they're less likely to fog or you don't notice them fogging. It means that they physically cannot, because the cold air from your regulator is coming in here and circulating through the entire inside of the mask, including the eyepiece area. The reason that you get fogging in a traditional mask is that you have colder water outside, the air inside your mask warms up from body heat, and the humidity in the air in your mask condenses onto the faceplate. If you have a constant stream of cold air that is keeping the interior of the mask below body temperature, closer to water temperature, then you don't get condensation. So it's actually kind of funny. This can condense. I can get fog on this at the surface. If I've got my valve right here, you'll notice you can't have a snorkel with a full face mask, so they all have some alternative way to breathe surface air. And on the OTS Guardian, it's this threaded valve right here. When I have this open on the surface for breathing, this can fog up because I can get hot air inside and condense water vapor. But as soon as you go underwater, well, obviously close that and go underwater, cold air from your tank starts circulating through and the mask defogs itself virtually immediately. The fact that the mask is pressurized also gives you two other advantages. One of them is that your mask can't leak water. In fact, we had one instructor once who wanted us to demonstrate being able to clear our full face mask, and you can't, because if you try to let water in, the mask is pressurized. This is like trying to flood your regulator. You can't do it. It just blows air through and clears out the mask by itself, which is a pretty cool process. The other benefit is you won't get mask squeeze. If you've ever had the air in your mask, you start shallow and you go deep and your mask squeezes uncomfortably onto your face, yeah, it's not that difficult to remediate that problem by blowing some air into the mask, but your full face mask will never have it because your full face mask balances its pressure to the ambient pressure at whatever depth you're at, because the whole thing is constantly pressurized. You will often see people suggest that the only time you would want full face masks are if you need underwater communications, and I'll disagree. Not because that's a good reason to use a full face mask, but because the basic recreational level communication systems out there that fit on these masks are, in my experience, really underwhelming. We tried OTS PowerCom and we tried the OTS PowerCom 3000, and neither of those was functionally usable. It was like listening to a police scanner over an airline PA system.
Now, there are a number of potential problems here that are worth considering. One of them is, how does a needle-free wetsuit?
We took the comm systems off the masks, and we remain very, very happy with them, just as full face masks. Okay, now let's talk about the whole face-hugging octopus side of things. That's going to give you a couple of benefits that are just comfort-based, like if you're in cold water, well, there's a lot less of that cold water touching your face if you have a full face mask on. That full face mask doesn't have to have a border around lenses, so you typically get a wider field of view with a full face mask. And then what I think is the most important benefit that a lot of people overlook is that this thing is strapped to your face. It's, first off, very difficult to knock off. You're not going to be, if someone else in your dive group swims past you and accidentally kicks you in the face with their fins, it's very unlikely to dislodge a full face mask the way that it could dislodge a regulator or a normal mask. And then if you have a medical emergency and you lose consciousness underwater, whether that is oxygen toxicity, whether it is nitrosis, whether it is any number of things, anything that would cause you to lose conscious control of what you were doing, well, your regulator's strapped to your face. You're not going to reflexively spit it out. It's not going to fall out. It's going to be there. And I think that's a significant safety benefit while you're at depth. Your air supply is going to stay with you all the time. Now, it's not a universal benefit because once you hit the surface, the opposite kind of is true. If you run out of air at the surface, well, you could actually suffocate in your full face mask if you aren't there to take it off or to open whatever the vent mechanism is on it. But I think that's a lot less of a significant downside that compared to the benefit of having your air supply fixed to you while you're underwater. One other benefit to point out is, of course, you can use corrective lenses in a full face mask like a regular mask, but you can also use contact lenses in a full face mask. Because the mask doesn't flood, contact lenses work just fine. Yes, you will perhaps have issues and lose them if your mask floods, but the mask flooding is a pretty darn rare event, and for all of your regular diving, your contacts will work great. All right, now the fact that a full face mask is better overall than the traditional regulator mask combination doesn't mean that the full face mask is without its downsides at all. There are definitely some downsides. They're just not as significant as the benefits, but we do need to talk about them. So first up is cost. Definitely a significant downside. A full face mask is going to cost you double what you'll pay for a normal regulator, if not more. Plan on $1,000 to get yourself a full face mask and its regulator. There are some budget models. We did, in fact, start using OTS Spectrums, which is it's a much cheaper mask, and it uses a normal traditional regulator mostly. Our experience with them, though, was that kind of either go big or go home. My recommendation is either stick with the traditional setup or go all the way to a full-featured proper full face mask like the OTS Guardian or the other competitors on the market. The biggest concern I had with the Spectrum is that the regulator was held into that thing by literally a zip tie, and I just didn't feel comfortable with that setup. Now, the one benefit, by the way, to the Spectrum before we move on past it is it does not have a solid housing over your nose. It is fully encapsulated, so you do have all of these other benefits. It is a pressurized mask, but if you need to equalize by squeezing your nose, you can do that through an Ocean Technology Systems Spectrum mask. You just grab it and squeeze. It's a soft rubber part of the mask. That's really, to my mind, the only significant benefit that the Spectrum has over the other offerings on the market. Anyway, moving on. Beyond cost, equalization, as we just touched on, can be tricky. So the Guardian and I think most of the other masks like this on the market typically have sort of a nose cap system that sits right up against your nostrils, and so you kind of just shove the whole mask up into your face to press that area of the mask against your nose and hopefully seal it so that you can blow air and equalize that way. Now, I consider myself fairly fortunate that I can equalize just with jaw movement and swallowing, and so for me, having to close my nose off to equalize isn't an issue. The only time I'd have to do that is if I'm having some sinus trouble. In that case, I probably shouldn't be diving. But the OTS system does work for that. It's just not great. So if you have issues equalizing and if you have to pinch off your nose to do it, this maybe is something worth testing out before you go all in buying the equipment. The other definite non-controversial downside to a full face mask is changing gas. If you're doing tech diving, if you're doing something where you need to change between different gas mixtures, different tanks, that's going to be really a pain using a full face mask. I'm not going to say it's impossible. You can do it, but you don't really want to. If you're going to be juggling tanks around, that's when the normal regulator is really a much better system to use. The people who use the out-of-air emergency and, oh, you have a full face mask, so you'll just die, those folks are wrong. The procedure for sharing air, to get rid of a full face mask and accept someone else's air, is definitely a more complex process than if you just spit out your normal regulator and grab a new one, but it's not a difficult process. Essentially, the one compounding factor is that when you remove your mask, your regulator, you're losing your eyesight with it, at least in saltwater. You're losing your goggles with it. And so you really need to have your air located first. Like grab your buddy's spare air, then pull your mask off, put the air in, and then go for your spare mask. I think it's fairly important as a safety issue, as a redundancy backup issue, to, when you're diving with a full face mask, carry a spare traditional mask with you. We've done that the whole time we've ever been diving full face masks, and our Octos have regular spare air emergency regulators on them. So we can share air with anybody else in the dive group if we need to, and we can use shared air ourselves. It's just a little more complicated, and it's a process that we deliberately practice. You use a lot more air with a full face mask. I don't think that's actually true. I've done a little bit of testing back and forth, and I don't see a significant difference in air usage myself between my full face mask and a traditional regulator. And frankly, to me, even if I did use, say, 10% more gas in the full face mask, all the benefits are really worth it. Buoyancy. There are people who will point out that a full face mask holds a fair amount more air around your head than a traditional mask, and that messes up your trim. I think while that is technically true, it just means you have to set your trim with that full face mask in mind, and ultimately it's a non-issue. Some people may have claustrophobia issues with the full face mask. That's possible. If that is you, bummer, that sucks. Can't really do anything about it, sorry. Getting certified for a full face mask can actually be a surprisingly difficult thing to do. Our local dive shop didn't have anybody who offered the certification. We actually had to take a dive trip to Florida and specifically seek out a dive shop in Florida that would be able to do our certifications for a full face mask. The certification process isn't difficult. There's only a couple of skills, and it's primarily taking the thing off and putting it back on underwater. But it's something to keep in mind. All right, I want to close this out by addressing the question of, if full face masks are indeed so much better, which they are, why don't more people use them? Why is it so rare to see a full face mask on the dive boat? Well, first off, let's consider we're only talking about recreational diving here. The commercial divers who are out there every day working underwater for a living, virtually 100% of them are using full face masks because they're better for a bunch of reasons. But when it comes to the recreational divers, most recreational divers don't own all of their own kit. They're renting their Octo and their BCD usually from the dive shop where they are on vacation diving. And that cost factor of full face masks compared to regular, just a plain old reg and a plain old mask, that's huge if you're a dive shop trying to set up dozens of sets of gear to have for your rental customers. So the dive shops don't cater to full face masks, and in return, the client base doesn't expect to need to train for them. So most of the basic and advanced open water sorts of certifications aren't going to cover full face masks because that's seen as sort of an eccentric, esoteric, specialized gear choice. And this becomes a self-fulfilling cycle, fundamentally based on the cost of the equipment. I think if the full face masks were the same cost as a traditional regulator, you would see a huge demand for their regular use, especially in rental situations, from people who had the opportunity to try both in open water environments and realize, wow, the full face mask has a couple small downsides and a whole bunch of very significant benefits. So that is a hill that I will dive on. That's a hill that I will dive on. The full face masks are, in fact, the better option. They cost more. That's an obstacle that has to be overcome. And if you're doing tech diving, kind of a different thing. The recreational divers, if you haven't tried one, see if your local dive shop can hook you up with a test dive in a pool. You might enjoy it a lot more than you'd expect.